So the other day I was looking at a client's bank statement, and each month their account had a charge for a monthly maintenance fee. However, each month they also received a credit immediately following that charge for the same amount entered as monthly maintenance fee waived. And I thought, if somebody picked my pocket but then turned around and immediately gave me my wallet back, would I be grateful? Stay tuned. Today's video, Get a Better Bank, Managing Your Cash Flow and Emergency Fund, coming up. Hey everyone, it's Jeff Drayton, Certified Financial Planner Professional and founder of Jeffrey A. Drayton Financial Planning and Wealth Management, LLC. Today, I'm giving some very specific advice on, first, managing your cash flow, second, creating an emergency fund, and lastly, I'm even going to suggest an institution where you might want to set all of this up in what I am calling Get a Better Bank. You know, if you're like many of my typical clients, you have several accounts. You probably have a 401k, 403b, or some such retirement account at work, an IRA, Roth IRA, or both at a brokerage firm. Maybe you have a 529 plan for your children's college savings, and the list could go on. But the account that you probably use the most, where your paycheck is going and from which you pay most of your bills, is likely just a good old checking account. And because money is going in and out of this account on an almost daily basis, people in my profession usually refer to this as your cash flow account, the account in which cash is continually flowing in and out. So one would think that an account that gets this much use, probably the account that rightly or wrongly gets the greatest amount of your attention, is one that you have thought about the longest and hardest as to where you want to have it. In other words, who's going to be your bank? In my experience, such is not the case, or at least if there were considerations, they certainly weren't the ones that I feel have the greatest chance of improving your financial situation. Many of my clients tell me they chose their bank based on where the branches were located, or where they had their ATMs, and the fees that they charge, or what type of investment options they have available, or even whether or not the institution itself has gone through litigation for defrauding its customers, seems to make little difference. To each of these clients, I suggest you can do better. So who do I recommend? Well, I'm going to give you a name, but before I do, please know I have no affiliation with this firm whatsoever. I do not work for them, and they are not the custodian for the client accounts that I manage. I will even say there might well be other firms that offer many of the benefits for which I am recommending them. However, I'm not aware of any, at least not any that have the entire combination of benefits that I feel are important. But that certainly doesn't mean that such a firm does not exist. By all means, do your own research and due diligence. Maybe use some of the criteria that I'm laying out in this video as a test by which to compare whatever firm it is that you would like to consider. So here goes. Who is it that I recommend for banking needs? I recommend Charles Schwab Bank. I use what they refer to as their high-yield investor checking account. You can find out more information about this account as well as apply online by doing a Google search for Charles Schwab High-Yield Investor Checking. The Schwab Bank High-Yield Investor Checking account should be the first thing that comes up. Now be aware, if you open this account, Schwab will also open a Schwab One brokerage account that they will link to your new Schwab checking account along with it. That is also an account that I feel will provide you value, especially in setting up an emergency fund, and I will tell you why in a minute. However, first up, let's just talk checking account, or what I have already referred to as your cash flow account. What are the features in the Schwab account that I find to be valuable? Number one, no fees. There are no service fees, and there's also no account minimum balance. You're not going to get nickeled and dimed if your account falls below some arbitrary minimum amount. Additionally, this account, even as a checking account, does pay interest on your balance. Is it a lot? No. But my recommendation is that you maintain approximately 2 months of household expenses in your cash flow account at all times. Keeping more than a few months of household expenses in your checking or savings account, I feel, is exposing you to an unacceptable amount of opportunity cost. I'll talk more about opportunity cost in a minute. But for many households, even 2 months of expenses will likely mean more than a few $1,000s in cash. Why not receive some amount of interest on this cash flow money? And what are some other benefits in your Schwab account? Well, Schwab also rebates back into your account any ATM fees that you are charged, meaning you can use any ATM, and if that ATM charges you a fee, Schwab will then refund back into your account the amount of that fee at the end of the month. Nice. And lastly, Schwab does not charge you a foreign transaction fee should you leave the country and use this account to pay expenses or access your cash. I would suggest this be the standard by which you judge any bank account that you have or are considering. Now, there are some downsides to using an institution like Schwab for your banking needs, and I will point to one in particular. Depending on where you live, you might not have a Schwab office nearby, and even if you do, that office will not be set up to do the types of things that many people associate with a visit to their local bank branch. Most of your interactions with a firm like Schwab, using them for your banking needs, will need to be done online or via their mobile app. Now, in the modern age, for many people, this is probably not a problem. Most anything you can think of can likely be done either via their mobile app or online. If I need to deposit a check, I use the app, take a picture of the check with my smartphone, and very quickly it is deposited into my account. Also, both through their website and via their phone app, you can set up recipients and pay bills and fulfill most, if not all, your banking needs. However, if you are someone who is not tech savvy or desires the interaction of an actual in-person bank teller, Schwab or someone similar might not be your preferred solution. Now let me take a few minutes to talk emergency funds. Remember how I said that if you open a Schwab checking account, they will open a brokerage account along with that checking account automatically? Well, that could be an excellent account to use for your emergency fund. How so? Well, let me back up for a minute and first explain what an emergency fund is and how it should be used in your financial planning. An emergency fund is exactly what it sounds like. It's the place where you will go if you have a true financial emergency. What constitutes a financial emergency? Well, it is some financial expense or possibly a loss of income that a reasonable person could not have seen coming. For example, an unexpected job loss, a large medical expense, or any kind of a large copay on an insurance policy due to some unexpected catastrophe. These are events for which you want to have a reserve of funds set aside so that you will not have to go into debt or raid your retirement assets or take some such other ill-advised financial action just to make ends meet. An emergency fund is an insurance policy. However, it's not an insurance policy that you buy from an insurance company. It's one that you create for yourself. Now, a great question you might be asking is, how much should be in this emergency fund? The answer? It depends. Generally, financial planners such as myself recommend that you have between 3 to 6 months of household expenses or possibly after-tax income set aside in your emergency fund. How do you determine whether it should be 3 months or 6 or somewhere in between? Well, that depends on your household situation. For instance, if you have a family and your household is entirely dependent on one wage earner, one person's income, you probably want to lean towards the higher end, closer to 6 months. Losing a job and giving yourself 6 months to get reemployed in a similar paying position, especially if you are a professional, is likely none too much. However, if you are in a household with 2 wage earners, both with similar salaries, possibly your emergency fund could be less. The perfect emergency fund balance or amount is one that provides an adequate safeguard in the event of a household economic hardship, but does not tie up an excessive amount of your investment assets. And this brings up a point about emergency funds. Remember how I said that an emergency fund is an insurance policy? Well, insurance costs money, and an emergency fund is no exception. Now you might ask, how does having dedicated savings set aside for a financial emergency, my own money, cost me anything? Well, that has to do with what you are going to do with these emergency fund dollars. You see, in order to ensure that the money you set aside in your emergency fund will be there when you need it, you are going to want to put it into something safe, which is to say, probably not the stock market. Something I've already mentioned is that one of the things an emergency fund might be used for is income replacement when a household wage earner loses his or her job. Something that frequently precipitates an unexpected job loss is a downturn in the economy, and something that frequently goes hand in hand with an economic downturn is lower stock values. Therefore, if you invest your emergency fund dollars in the stock market, you run the risk that at the exact moment you will most need your emergency fund money, your emergency fund could be experiencing a depressed value. A value that means you will have less set aside to weather that emergency than you planned or intended. For this reason, the recommendation for your emergency fund would be that these dollars stay in something safe, an investment that will protect the principal of your savings. The safest option would be to keep this money in cash. An example might be a money market fund. Money market funds typically have a share price that stays fixed at $1, and they simply pay a modest amount of interest on your principal. This interest rate is probably higher than what you would receive in an interest-bearing checking or savings account, but less than what you would get over the long term in just about any other conceivable investment. And there is where the cost is in your emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of household expenses or after-tax income is likely going to be tens of thousands of dollars. Over a long period of time, say many years or decades, one might hope to receive possibly a double-digit rate of return in, say, a stock growth fund. But sitting in a money market fund at today's interest rates, you're probably going to be doing well to get even a fraction of that. That difference in investment return represents a cost. We investment advisors even have a name for that cost. It's called opportunity cost. And over a long period of time, that opportunity cost might very well end up amounting to thousands of dollars in lost investment return. That is the insurance price of having and maintaining an emergency fund. So what's the solution for this dilemma? On the one hand, you have saved the dollars required to have an adequate emergency fund, and you want to keep that money safe so that it will be there when you need it. But you hate the thought of losing all the potential investment returns simply so you can be prepared for an emergency which, frankly, might never come. Well, one thought might be to take a more middle-of-the-road approach to how you allocate your emergency fund dollars. Instead of placing all of your emergency fund into a money market fund, which is to say, cash, you might choose to spread this money over 2 or 3 funds, each with a slightly higher investment return potential, yet while still keeping an eye on safety and principal protection. So, what might an approach like that look like? Well, allow me to suggest something like this. You could put 1/3 of your emergency fund savings in a money market fund, ready cash in the first place you would go in a crisis, but then another third in a short-term bond fund. This is a fund that likely only holds bonds that are going to mature in the next 12 months and is therefore somewhat limited in its potential for volatility. And for that last third, you maybe go most aggressive and choose either an intermediate-term bond fund or something like an aggregate bond index fund. Something you need to understand is this. Bonds, like stocks, can and do experience fluctuations in their values. For this reason, placing money in a bond fund will mean that you are exposing those dollars to the potential for some risk of principal. One would expect more so in the aggregate bond fund than the short-term bond fund. However, these funds would be more conservative than putting your emergency fund money in stock. Again, something that I would not recommend. You see, bond funds are frequently the types of investments that investors are going towards in times of financial crisis, not running away from. Therefore, one might have a reasonable expectation that investments such as this would at least maintain their value or experience more modest losses, even should the economy turn south. What you are really doing by setting up an emergency fund in this way is balancing the need for safety with the desire not to experience an excessive amount of opportunity cost. An investment portfolio is frequently constructed with the need to balance competing concerns. And always when making considerations such as this, you are going to want to know thyself. Your portfolio should match your investment goals with your tolerance and ability to take on risk. What I have presented is just one example of what that solution for an emergency fund might look like. So now let me return to my recommendation to possibly set up your checking account, or again, Cashflow account, at a discount brokerage firm such as Schwab that also offers banking services. Remember what I said about how if you open a checking account, Schwab will also provide you with a brokerage account? A brokerage account is an account that, unlike a checking account, is one in which you can purchase mutual funds. That account could be an excellent place to house your emergency fund dollars. Here, you would have the ability to purchase funds like each of those that I described: a money market fund, a short-term bond fund, and an aggregate bond fund. And this is where I feel a person has the opportunity to place their household finances on extremely solid financial footing. This can be done by establishing one's checking or cash flow account and emergency fund brokerage account at a single discount bank/brokerage firm like Schwab or some such equivalent. Some of the reasons why I feel that this is close to an ideal for many households are the following. First, Having both your cash flow account and emergency fund brokerage account at the same firm and therefore visible and manageable on the same website makes it very easy to manage your short-term cash assets. Should you be accumulating too much cash in your cash flow account, more than the 2 months worth of household expenses that I recommend that you maintain, no problem. You can then just move that excess cash to your emergency fund brokerage account and distribute those dollars among the funds that you are holding there. Funds that should produce a better return than your savings or checking account, but are not committing those dollars to a long-term aggressive investment strategy. This will likely be possible with just some number of mouse clicks. By all means, if your emergency fund starts to become greater than the 3 to 6 months of expenses that you have planned, at that point you might want to consult with your investment advisor about moving some of those assets out of your emergency fund and into an account that is designed for longer-term growth. Another advantage to this approach: it is something you can likely do yourself. At least you can if you have a modicum of investment know-how, meaning you are comfortable opening an account and placing trades to purchase mutual fund shares. You see, the types of funds that you likely want to be considering for your emergency fund, money market funds, short-term bond funds, or even an aggregate bond fund, are not high-flying funds that produce huge returns. That's not their purpose. However, because of this, you are going to want to seek efficiency. What do I mean by this? Well, hiring an investment advisor to manage these emergency fund assets is going to dampen any potential return you might receive, possibly substantially. And they really shouldn't require that much management. Unlike a retirement account or some such other more dynamic investment account, an emergency fund is something that should really just sit there and not be touched. Its only purpose is to be available in the event of an emergency, and it's an emergency that hopefully never happens. This is also a reason that I tend not to favor retail banks, the kind that have branches all over town, for short-term savings dollars. Some of them do offer brokerage services and would have these types of funds available, maybe even funds with their own name on them, but they tend not to be cheap. Of course, you should do your own due diligence and research any fund that you are going to invest in thoroughly. And something I would certainly check on really any mutual fund I am considering buying is, what are the internal expenses or the expense ratio of the fund? If I'm looking at a bond fund that I'm only hoping will give me 1 or 2 extra % of return over what a money market fund or an interest-bearing checking account is paying, I certainly do not want to be sacrificing some large chunk of that extra return to the investment company who manages that fund by paying exorbitant fees. So there you have it. I wish you the best in managing your checking and savings or cash flow accounts and creating a well-structured emergency fund that will provide you with security now, as well as potentially give you some amount of investment return for the future. If you found value in this video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to contact me directly, do not hesitate to email my firm at info@jeffreyadrayton.com or via my website at www.jeffreyadrayton.com. I'm Jeff Drayton. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, as always, nothing in this video is meant to be specific advice for you. Advice like that can only be had by working with a financial planner, someone who knows you and your situation. I would encourage you to seek out someone who is a certified financial planner. This is signified by the letter CFP with the registered trademark sign following his or her name. I would also encourage you to work with a fee-only financial planner. That's 2 words, fee only, not fee-based, not fee plus commission. Both of those terms mean that the planner or advisor can receive commissions and is therefore not free of the conflict of interest inherent to commission sales. Again, I'm Jeff Drayton. Thanks for watching.